Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into your sources to pull out the crucial insights, giving you the shortcut to being well-informed.
Uh-huh.
Today, we're diving deep into a text that takes a hard look at the fundamental ideas underlying modern science and asks some really big questions about reality, consciousness, and, well, pretty much everything.
That's right. Our source material is the introduction to a book titled Beyond a Materialist Worldview, and it really challenges the prevailing scientific paradigm. It proposes that maybe it's time to consider a much broader understanding of the universe and, our place in it.
Exactly. Think of this deep dive as cracking open the foundation of what many people assume science knows.
Right.
And is prompted by a perspective that weaves together, well, empirical research with some pretty significant personal experience. So our mission today is to explore the source's critique of scientific materialism, that idea that only physical matter is real.
Yeah, the stuff is all there is view.
Right. And then understand the scientific breakthroughs, particularly in quantum mechanics, that seem to challenge this view.
And then look at this emerging vision for what the source calls a postmaterialist science.
Exactly. This deep dive is custom-tailored for you, designed to give you a clear, engaging overview of these complex ideas straight from the source itself.
And what's really fascinating here, I think, is how the author's personal story kind of sets the stage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're quite open about it. They share some profound spiritual experiences and also some challenging health experiences in their life.
Well, they fundamentally shaped their scientific path,
Okay.
particularly their research into consciousness and the whole brain-mind relationship.
How so?
Well, the source mentions a childhood sense of deep connection with nature, like feeling one with the forest. And then later, a really mysterious long-term illness.
Oh.
That brought them to a really desperate point. And it was during this illness, they report having a profound experience involving sensing, leaving their body, encountering what they describe as a being of light.
Wow.
Yeah.
That apparently conveyed telepathic messages and even made specific predictions that, according to the source, later came true.
That's quite a starting point for a scientific inquiry.
It is. But the source presents it not as proof of anything itself, but as the root of the author's drive.
The why.
Exactly. The why behind wanting to explore scientifically whether human essence is just the brain, or if there's something more. It provides that personal hook for the whole scientific exploration we're about to dive into.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the source's core argument about what it calls the downfall of scientific materialism.
Right. The source argues that what most scientists today think of as the modern scientific worldview, well, it's actually built on a set of pretty deep-seated philosophical assumptions.
Assumptions that many aren't even aware of.
That's the claim, yeah. Assumptions dating back to some of the earliest Greek philosophers, which then got kind of fused with classical physics later on.
And these aren't just abstract ideas, are they? They really shape how we think about, well, ourselves and the world.
Absolutely. The source identifies 4 key ones that became sort of foundational to classical physics. Think, Galileo, Descartes, Newton, that era.
Okay, what are they?
So, first, materialism. That's the belief that only matter exists. Everything is just physical particles and fields, stuff.
Got it, just stuff.
Second, reductionism. The idea that you understand complex things like a living cell, or even the mind, by breaking them down into their simplest parts and how those parts interact.
Right. Understand the molecules, go understand the cell, understand the neurons to understand thought.
Precisely. Then third, determinism. This is the view that if you know the exact state of a system right now and you know the physical laws,
you can predict its future perfectly.
Exactly. Everything's basically predetermined, like clockwork. And fourth, mechanism. The universe functions like a giant machine governed by fixed, unchanging laws.
Okay, materialism, reductionism, determinism, mechanism. The MRDM framework, almost.
Something like that. But here's where the source makes a really critical point.
What's that?
The actual founders of classical physics, people like Newton, they didn't necessarily see these as like the absolute truth about everything. No, they were often deeply spiritual men. They saw these principles as really useful hypotheses or tools for studying the material world, but they didn't necessarily believe reality was only material.
So the tools became mistaken for the entire reality.
That's exactly what the source argues. It claims this nuance just got lost over time. And by the 19th century, these useful ideas had hardened into rigid dogmas.
Dogmas.
Yeah. Forming what the source calls scientific materialism, basically, an entrenched belief system, not just a flexible scientific method anymore.
And this hardening into dogma, I assume that had pretty big implications, especially for understanding things like consciousness.
Huge implications, yes. According to this strict scientific materialism, well, our consciousness, our thoughts, feelings, memories, our sense of self, even free will or any kind of spiritual experience, they're all seen as either identical to or simply byproducts of the electrical and chemical firing in the brain, just brain sparks.
So the mind is the brain activity, full stop.
Or just an effect of it, yeah. And crucially, this view implies our thoughts, our mental activity can't actually influence the physical world. Not even our own brains or bodies, really.
We're just complex biological machines, automatons almost.
That's the picture it paints. And consciousness. It's assumed to just vanish, return to oblivion, when the brain dies.
The source points out that this viewpoint became incredibly dominant in academia, especially in the 20th century.
Hugely dominant, to the point where the source claims questioning it could actually be professionally risky for a scientist. It was often presented as the only rational, evidence-based way to see the world.
Wow.
But what's striking is the source's counterargument. It says that despite all the technological successes that came from using materialist methods,
Which are undeniable.
undeniable, yes, but despite that, the almost absolute dominance of this worldview actually stifled scientific progress in certain crucial areas.
Like what?
Specifically, the scientific study of the mind, of consciousness itself, and anything related to spirituality.
Because they don't fit the materialist box easily.
Exactly. By largely ignoring or dismissing subjective human experience, the feeling of what it's like to be conscious, the source argues this view has led to a severely distorted and impoverished conception of who we are and, our place in the universe.
The source really doesn't hold back.
Yeah.
Even uses the term fundamentalist for some hardcore proponents.
It does. Comparing them essentially to religious fanatics in how rigidly they defend this belief system. And it mentions specific figures like Richard Dawkins or Daniel Dennett, characterizing them from the source's perspective, of course, as kind of militant atheists fighting a cultural war, holding what the source calls a naive and presumptuous belief that neuroscience will eventually, inevitably, explain away consciousness entirely in terms of brain activity.
The it's just a matter of time argument.
Right, which the source labels promissory materialism, noting that this kind of promise has actually been around for centuries, not just recently.
And the core scientific critique from the source is that these materialist theories they fail. They can't actually explain consciousness.
They fail specifically, the source argues, to explain the fundamental aspects of consciousness, most notably what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
Okay, let's unpack that. What is the hard problem, according to the source?
Well, as the source defines it, it's the question of why and how physical brain activity, just neurons firing, chemicals moving, gives rise to subjective, felt experience.
The inner life.
Exactly, the qualia. Why does seeing a certain wavelength of light feel like seeing the color purple? Why does tissue damage feel like pain?
Materialism can map the brain activity associated with purple or pain.
Right, it can find correlations. But the source insists it cannot explain why that physical activity should feel like anything at all from the inside. Why isn't it all just happening in the dark, functionally, without any subjective experience?
That's the gap materialism can't bridge, according to this critique.
That's the argument, yes. That fundamental why of subjective experience remains elusive for materialism.
Okay, so that lays out the critique pretty clearly. The hidden assumptions, the hardening into dogma, the limitations on understanding consciousness, the failure to solve the hard problem. So what does the source present as a major scientific challenge to this whole materialist framework? Something from within science itself.
Well, this is where the source pivots quite dramatically. It turns to the world of quantum mechanics.
Ah, QM.
Yes. Describing it as having brought about a kind of dematerialization of the world, it kicks off with that famous story about Lord Kelvin around 1900.
Right, saying physics was basically all wrapped up except for two little clouds on the horizon.
Exactly. Those little clouds, the problem of the ether and black body radiation, turned out to be hurricanes. They led directly to relativity and quantum mechanics.
Which didn't just adjust the old physics.
No, according to the source, QM fundamentally invalidated the core metaphysical assumptions of scientific materialism.
How so? In what way?
Well, for starters, QM showed that atoms and subatomic particles, they aren't like tiny, solid billiard balls existing in definite places at definite times. That whole classical picture, gone.
So the very building blocks of matter aren't really material
Yeah.
in the everyday sense.
Not in that solid, concrete, classical sense, no. The source describes them as showing tendencies to exist. They operate more in a realm of possibilities until they are, in some sense, observed or measured.
Tendencies to exist.
Yeah. So the source argues QM has effectively dematerialized the world. At its base, reality isn't composed of tiny, solid chunks of matter.
Wow, okay, that's already a huge departure from materialism.
It is, and it gets even stranger. QM also introduced the effect of the observer.
The idea that looking at something changes it.
At the quantum level, yes. The act of observing or measuring a quantum system is inextricably linked with the outcome. It's not a passive process.
Okay.
And this led some of the actual pioneers of QM, people like Max Planck, Erwin Schrödinger, to propose something really radical. That the observer's consciousness might be somehow vital, essential even, for physical events to collapse from possibility into actuality.
Consciousness affecting physical reality.
That was their interpretation. And furthermore, that mental events, thoughts, intentions could potentially influence the physical world. The source notes that there are recent studies claim to support this kind of interpretation.
Now that sounds like a direct contradiction to the materialist idea that consciousness is just a powerless byproduct, an epiphenomenon.
It absolutely is. As Wolfgang Pauli, another QM founder, is quoted in the source, he suggested reality has two complementary aspects: the physical, physis, and the psychological psyche.
So mind and matter is two sides of the same coin, maybe, not just matter causing mind.
Something like that. It suggests the physical world isn't the only reality, maybe not even the primary one.
And the source brings up another really weird QM concept, right? Non-locality, entanglement.
Oh, yeah. That's Einstein's spooky action at a distance.
Explain that again briefly.
So, entangled particles, once they've interacted, remain connected in a way that's, well, instantaneous. If you measure a property of one, you instantly know the corresponding property of the other, no matter how far apart they are. Miles, light years, it doesn't matter.
Faster than light communication.
It doesn't seem to involve communication through space in the normal sense. It's more like they remain part of a single unified system. And the source emphasizes this isn't just theory. It's been experimentally confirmed over and over since the 1970s.
Okay, and the implication.
The source highlights this as evidence that the universe might be fundamentally an indivisible whole, not just a collection of separate interacting parts.
A holistic universe.
Exactly. And then the author adds an intriguing speculation. Maybe this principle of non-locality isn't just confined to microphysics. Maybe it operates in the realm of the psyche, too.
Telepathy, maybe, things like that.
The source doesn't explicitly jump there in this section, but it lays the groundwork for considering such possibilities later based on this fundamental physical principle.
So you've got QM showing matter isn't solid, the observer affects reality, consciousness might be fundamental, and the universe is interconnected non-locally. That sounds like a pretty thorough dismantling of those classical materialist assumptions.
That's precisely the case the source makes. QM, originating from within physics itself, pulled the rug out from under classical materialism.
Yet the source laments that the materialist worldview still persists so strongly, right? In academia, in culture.
Yes. Despite its foundations being undermined by physics over a century ago, the source argues materialism lingers on, often due to inertia, disciplinary boundaries, or maybe even, it suggests, a kind of willful ignorance among some proponents.
And it's this lingering dominance, this mismatch between foundational physics and the prevailing scientific ideology, that the source says necessitates a conscious shift, a movement towards a post-materialist science.
Exactly. Given this critique of materialism and the challenges posed by QM, the source then describes concrete efforts underway to actually build and promote this post-materialist science.
Okay, so it's not just a critique, there's action being taken.
Right. The source highlights a pivotal event, the International Summit on Post-Materialist Science, Spirituality, and Society, held in Tucson back in 2014.
Tucson, Arizona. Okay.
Yeah. The author was involved in organizing it, along with other researchers like Gary Schwartz and Lisa Miller.
And the purpose of this summit?
It was specifically to bring together scientists from diverse fields, biology, neuroscience, psychology, medicine, even parapsychology, to analyze the existing empirical evidence that seems to support a post-materialist viewpoint.
So, looking beyond QM at other data.
Exactly. And to discuss how this potential new paradigm could evolve and what its impact might be on science and society.
What came out of that summit?
A key outcome was the publication of the Manifesto for a Postmaterialist Science.
A manifesto, I got it.
Yes, published in the peer-reviewed journal Explore, and the source makes a point of mentioning that over 300 scientists and philosophers worldwide have since signed it, including some described as very prestigious ones.
So it's indicating a growing movement, not just a fringe idea.
That's the impression given. The source acknowledges that critics might label these scientists nonconformist or outliers.
Sure.
But it counters this by drawing parallels to historical figures, think Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Einstein, who also fundamentally questioned the scientific status quo of their time.
And were eventually proven right.
Precisely. It frames this push not as being anti-science, but as science needing to expand its boundaries, to evolve beyond limiting dogmas, just like it has before.
Are there other initiatives mentioned?
Yes, this movement apparently led to the creation of the Open Science Campaign and an associated website.
Okay, what's the goal there?
It seems to act as a kind of portal or hub, promoting research that explicitly tries to go beyond the dogmas the source critiques. It lists key areas like consciousness studies, integrative medicine and healing, post-materialistic approaches in physics and biology, even novel aspects of cosmology.
So a resource for researchers and the public interested in this alternative perspective.
Exactly, connecting people with relevant papers, researchers, and organizations working in these areas.
The source also mentions an anthology, right? A book.
Yes, called Expanding Science, Visions of a Postmaterialist Paradigm. The author was involved in writing and editing it, and it features contributions from researchers often associated with challenging mainstream views, like Amit Goswami, Rupert Sheldrake, Pim van Lommel.
People known for exploring consciousness, NDEs, morphic resonance, those kinds of topics.
Right. And the stated goal of that book is to analyze the empirical evidence that challenges the materialist position, but specifically for a non-specialized audience, trying to make these complex arguments accessible.
So translating the scientific debate for broader understanding.
That seems to be the aim. And then there's the creation of the Academy for the Advancement of Postmaterialist Sciences, AAPS, also based in Tucson.
Another organization.
Yes, explicitly focused on promoting cultural change and encouraging scientists to think and research beyond what they see as the limits of materialism and reductionism.
And one more effort mentioned is the Galileo Commission.
Right, initiated by the Scientific and Medical Network, SMN. Its aim, according to the source, is similar: to find ways to expand the scope of science so it can seriously investigate questions about meaning, purpose, consciousness, and experiences that mainstream science often ignores or can't integrate.
Did that commission produce anything?
Yes, it resulted in the Galileo Commission report, which is actually titled Beyond a Materialist Worldview, same as the book this introduction comes from.
Okay, so lots of organized effort summits, manifestos, websites, books, academies, commissions. It paints a picture of a coordinated push to establish this post-materialist paradigm.
That's certainly the narrative presented. The core argument running through all this is that to really understand the mind-brain relationship and consciousness more broadly, science must leave behind what the source calls the suffocating and limiting framework of scientific materialism.
And look at all the evidence.
Exactly. Consider all the relevant research on consciousness, even the parts that don't fit neatly into the old box. And the source claims the book it introduces does exactly that, meticulously analyzes empirical evidence that it argues is totally incompatible with the old materialist paradigm.
What kinds of evidence does the source say the book covers? What are these empirical challenges to materialism beyond QM?
The source lists several specific categories of phenomena that the book apparently delves into as evidence challenging materialism.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, evidence suggesting our mental abilities can influence our own bodies, like influencing brain activity directly, affecting the psychosomatic network, maybe even gene expression. Mind over matter, but within our own system.
Mind-body connection stuff.
Right. Then second, it points to psi phenomena.
Psi, like psychic phenomena.
Yes. Things like telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, distance vision or remote viewing, seeing things far away, precognition, knowing future events, and psychokinesis, mental influence on physical systems or organisms.
Okay, that's definitely outside the standard materialist view.
Way outside. Third, it mentions phenomena associated with death.
Such as?
Near-death experiences, NDEs, are a big one. Also, shared death experiences where people nearby feel they somehow participate in the dying person's transition, and deathbed visions seeing deceased relatives or spiritual figures shortly before death.
Experiences suggesting consciousness might persist beyond bodily death.
That's the implication explored. Fourth, the topic of reincarnation is listed cases suggestive of past lives.
Another very non-materialist concept.
Indeed. And finally, fifth, transcendent experiences, mystical states, peak experiences, moments of profound connection or insight that seem to go beyond ordinary consciousness.
So it's quite a collection. Mind-body influence, Saizai, death-related phenomena, reincarnation evidence, and transcendent states.
That's the range presented, and the source argues that this whole body of evidence, combined with the discoveries from quantum mechanics we discussed earlier,
Right.
forms the empirical bedrock for this emerging post-materialist paradigm, as the author sees it.
And the conviction is?
The conviction expressed is that embracing this broader paradigm, one that can actually accommodate all this evidence, is what will ultimately lead to the next great scientific revolution.
A paradigm shift on the scale of Copernicus or Einstein.
That's the scale of importance attributed to it. The source ends this introduction by really emphasizing the potentially tremendous implications of this new paradigm.
Implications for what?
Not just for science itself, but for our individual everyday lives, how we understand ourselves, our potential, our connection to others, and the cosmos, and even for the future evolution of our species. It frames the shift as profoundly important.
It basically presents the book and this whole post-materialist perspective as a way to break free from what it repeatedly calls the materialist straitjacket.
Precisely, an invitation to a more expansive view of reality.
Wow. What a journey through a perspective that certainly challenges a lot of conventional thinking. We've really unpacked the source's argument here, explore the historical roots and the alleged limitations of scientific materialism.
Yeah, those hidden assumptions and the hardening into dogma.
Right. And then we saw how fundamental discoveries in quantum physics seem to undermine its core tenets about the nature of matter and reality itself.
The dematerialization, the observer effect, non-locality.
Yeah. And finally, we looked at the organized efforts described in the source, the summits, the manifesto, the research focus aimed at establishing a post-materialist science.
A science based on a much wider range of empirical evidence, including all those phenomena like NDEs and psi that materialism struggles with or dismisses.
This deep dive into the source really serves as a powerful invitation, doesn't it? An invitation to question some deeply held beliefs about what science is, what consciousness is, and maybe the fundamental nature of existence.
It definitely highlights the case being made for a more expansive, perhaps more integrated understanding of what it means to be human and our place in the universe.
Okay, so based on everything we've pulled from this source today, from quantum mechanics suggesting that the fundamental reality isn't solid things, but maybe interconnected tendencies to exist, influenced by observation.
And that non-locality might hint at a deeper unity, maybe even extending to the mind.
In considering the empirical claims presented about consciousness influencing the body, or potentially existing beyond it, or connecting minds across distance, here's a thought to leave you with. If this perspective holds even some validity, what does that imply about your own sense of self?
Yeah.
If you aren't just a biomechanical machine with consciousness somehow emerging only from within your skull, but potentially part of a deeper, interconnected reality where mind plays a more fundamental role,
Yeah.
how does that change how you perceive your own thoughts, your experiences, your connection to the world around you? It definitely offers a radically different way to think about being alive, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the introduction of Beyond a Materialist Worldview. We hope exploring this source material has given you a clearer grasp of these quite challenging ideas.
And maybe spark some new questions or avenues for your own curiosity and exploration.
Stay curious and keep exploring the depths of knowledge.